I never imagined that paying for a stranger's medicine would save my life. At the pharmacy, the old man gripped my arm tightly and whispered urgently, "After your son leaves tonight, don't rake the leaves in the garden. Leave them there." I thought he was confused, but the next morning, when I saw the traces the fallen leaves had revealed, I realized that strange warning was the line between life and death. I'm truly grateful you're here. Before the story unfolds, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Your voice matters more than you think. And while you're there, ask yourself, would you ignore a warning that made no sense? Or follow it anyway? Also, a quick note, this story includes dramatized elements for storytelling and educational purposes. Any resemblance to real names or places is coincidental. It was a Monday morning in early October when everything quietly began to come apart, though at the time, I had no way of knowing it. The kind of morning that makes you feel grateful just to breathe it in crisp air, soft golden light spilling across the cornfields, and the familiar creak of the porch boards beneath my boots as I stepped outside. I'd been waking up at 5:30 for longer than I could remember. Old habits, Mary used to say, outlast the men who build them. She wasn't wrong. 5 years after she passed, my body still followed the same rhythm. Every morning, half asleep, I reached across the bed, expecting to feel her there. Every morning I brewed 2 cups of coffee before remembering I only needed one. The Sullivan place. My place, our place, stretched across 240 acres of Kansas farmland. Good soil, honest soil. The kind that remembered every season you worked it and gave back what it could if you treated it right. The house itself was plain but sturdy, a 2-story farmhouse built in 1947 from solid timber white paint, peeling in spots I kept meaning to fix. Out back stood the barn, leaning just slightly to the east, as if it were listening to whatever the wind carried across the fields. From the porch, coffee warming my hands, I could see the whole life Mary and I had built together. The equipment shed where my old John Deere sat waiting for spring planting. The chicken coop already alive with a dozen hens voicing their morning complaints. The cattle pasture where 20 Angus grazed quietly in the mist. Nothing fancy. Nothing wasted. Just a life shaped by work, patience, and time. Mary had been gone 5 years now, leaving behind a quiet that never truly faded. Some mornings, I still thought I heard her humming in the kitchen. Some evenings, I caught myself setting 2 plates on the table before stopping short. The grief had softened into a steady ache, the kind you learn to carry, without thinking about it too much until it catches you off guard. I finished my coffee and got to work. The cattle needed checking. A fence post along the south pasture had weakened and needed attention. There were always small repairs waiting, and I'd learned long ago that a farm doesn't care about excuses. At 68, I didn't move as fast as I once had, but I moved steady. On a farm, speed matters less than persistence. By mid-morning, as I examined that fence post, my thoughts drifted to Tucker, my boy. 38 years old now, though in my mind I still saw flashes of the kid who helped me fix this very fence, asking endless questions about why we did things the way we did. He'd stopped by the previous Sunday. Unexpected but welcome, we sat on the porch, shared a beer, talked about nothing important. Then, casual as if it were an afterthought, he mentioned a new business idea, a restaurant franchise. Investors, expansion plans, big opportunities. He just needed a little bridge money to make it work. I hate to ask, Dad, he'd said, not quite meeting my eyes. I'm about $5,000 short, just until next month. I'll pay you back. $5,000 wasn't nothing, but it wasn't impossible either. I'd spent my whole life trying to be the kind of father who could help his son when he needed it. Mary would have wanted that. You don't owe me interest, I told him. Family doesn't work that way. Just be careful. Restaurants can be tricky. It's all lined up, he said. I've thought it through. I wrote the check right there, watched him fold it into his wallet with a smile that looked so much like his mother's, it caught me off guard. He hugged me before leaving, held on a second longer than usual. Love you, Dad. Love you too, son. Now, 3 days later, I found myself wondering if I should have asked more questions. But I'd raised Tucker to stand on his own, to chase opportunity. A father has to trust his son, even when that path looks different from his own. The farm itself had been appraised at a little over $1.2 million the previous spring. Strong land, solid water rights, well-maintained buildings. I'd always planned to leave it to Tucker someday. We never spoke about it directly, people rarely do, but it was understood. 3 generations before me had worked this land. It would pass to the 4th. The afternoon passed, the way most did, checking irrigation lines, planning crop rotation, noting repairs that could wait until after harvest. Honest work, familiar work. The kind that lets a man's mind wander. Mary planting sunflowers along the fence because she loved how they followed the sun. Tucker learning to drive the tractor at 14 grinding gears until he finally got it smooth. This summer we built the barn together, working through heat that felt like it could melt steel. Good memories. As evening settled in, painting the fields in amber and rust, I stood on the porch again with another cup of coffee. The land lay quiet, corn nearly ready, pastures green from recent rains, a sky so wide it made you feel small in the best possible way. This was my life, simple, predictable, and good. I didn't know then that this ordinary Monday would be the last peaceful day I'd know for a very long time, or that my own son had already set events in motion that would tear everything apart. That afternoon, I made my regular trip into Lawrence to pick up my heart medication. It was a simple errand, one I'd done 100 times before, but this time, an elderly stranger would change everything. The drive took 30 minutes along County Road, 47 then onto Highway 59, where the flat farmland gradually gave way to the outskirts of town. Lawrence was the kind of place where everybody knew your name and your business. A county seat that had grown just enough to have a Walmart and a few chain restaurants, but still felt like the small town it had always been. Baxter's Pharmacy sat on Massachusetts Street, tucked between a hardware store and a diner that made the best cherry pie in the Douglas County. I'd been coming here since old man Baxter ran the place back in the 70s. Now his granddaughter Emma worked the counter, a sweet girl in her early 30s with red hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. The bell above the door chimed as I walked in. The pharmacy smelled the way pharmacies always do, antiseptic and vaguely medicinal, with a hint of the perfume display near the front. 2 other customers browsed the aisles, and one person stood at the counter ahead of me. An elderly man, maybe mid-70s, wearing a faded jacket that had seen better years. His hair was shock white, his frame thin, but not frail. He stood very still as Emma rang up his prescription. "That'll be $63.88, Mr. Blackwood," Emma said. The old man opened a worn leather wallet and counted out bills. 20, 10, 5, 5 more singles. He counted again slower this time, then looked up at Emma with something like defeat in his eyes. "I'm short $38.50, he said quietly. "I thought Medicare was supposed to cover—" "There's a coverage gap this month," Emma explained gently. "I'm sorry. Do you want me to put it back, or can you come in tomorrow?" "It's insulin," he said. "I need it today." I'd been raised to mind my own business, but I'd also been raised to help folks when they needed it. Mary used to say that money spent on kindness was never wasted. Before I could think twice about it, I stepped forward. "Excuse me," I said. "I'd like to cover that for him." Both of them turned to look at me. Emma smiled. The old man's eyes went wide. "Sir, I couldn't—" "It's no trouble at all," I said, pulling out my own wallet. "We all need help sometimes." The old man studied me for a long moment, something unreadable in his expression. His eyes were an unusual shade of blue, pale, almost gray but clear, and sharp as winter ice. "Thank you," he finally said. "I'll pay you back when I can." "No need," I told him. "Just take care of yourself." Emma rang up both transactions together, his insulin at $63.88, my heart medication at $64.12. I handed her my card, and she processed the payment with practiced efficiency. "You're all set, Mr. Sullivan," she said, passing me the pharmacy bag. "Total's $128 even. Your next refill will be ready November 15th. The old man collected his medication, clutching the small white bag like it held something precious, which I supposed it did his life measured out in units of insulin. He nodded to me, started toward the door, then stopped. He turned back. What happened next, I'd replay in my mind 1,000 times in the days that followed. The old man walked straight back to me, his gait steady despite his age. He reached out and gripped my forearm with surprising strength. His fingers were cold through my shirt sleeve. He leaned close, so close I could smell coffee on his breath and see the deep lines etched around his eyes. When he spoke, his voice was low and urgent, meant for my ears only. "After your son leaves tonight," he said, each word deliberate, "don't rake the garden. Let the leaves lie where they fell." I blinked. "I'm sorry, what will—" His grip tightened. "Don't rake the leaves. Promise me." The intensity in his gaze, those pale, piercing eyes, made something cold curl in my stomach. This wasn't the rambling of a confused old man. This was specific. This was a warning. Okay, I heard myself say. He held my gaze another moment, then released my arm and walked away. The bell chimed as he pushed through the door, And just like that, he was gone, disappearing down the sidewalk with a speed that seemed impossible for someone his age. I stood there, arm tingling where he'd gripped it, trying to process what had just happened. Mr. Sullivan. Emma's voice brought me back. "Are you all right?" "At that man," I said. "Do you know him?" She glanced at her computer screen. "Victor Blackwood. He's been coming here for a few months. Moved to the area recently, I think. Lives out on Route 12. Has he ever—" I trailed off. "How did you ask if someone seems strange without sounding paranoid? Does he seem all there?" Emma's brow furrowed. "He's always been perfectly lucid when I've dealt with him. Quiet, polite. Why?" "No reason," I said quickly. "Just curious." But it wasn't curiosity that had my mind racing as I walked back to my truck. It was the specificity of Victor Blackwood's words. "After your son leaves tonight." How did this stranger know Tucker was coming to see me tonight? I hadn't mentioned it to anyone. Tucker himself had only called this morning to say he'd swing by after work to pick up some tools he'd left in the barn. And the leaves. What did fallen leaves have to do with anything? As I drove home through the fading afternoon light, Victor Blackwood's words kept echoing in my mind. Don't rake the leaves. What was he trying to tell me? That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, Tucker's silver Audi pulled into my driveway. I was sitting on the porch, Victor's warning still fresh in my mind. I'd been there for the better part of an hour nursing a beer I hadn't really wanted. The October air had that bite to it that promised frost before dawn. Leaves, oak and maple, mostly carpeted the front yard in rust and gold. They'd been falling steady for 2 weeks, and normally I'd have raked them by now. But tonight, all I could think about was an old man's urgent whisper. Tucker's headlights swept across the porch as he pulled up next to my truck. The door opened, and there was my boy, 38 years old, but still looking like he was trying to impress someone. Dark slacks, button-down shirt hair, styled with gel. He carried a leather overnight bag. "Hey, Dad!" He climbed the steps with easy confidence. Got that from his mother. Mary never met a room she couldn't walk into like she owned it. "Evening," I said, gesturing to the cooler. "Beer's cold if you want one." "Sure." He grabbed a bottle, twisted the cap, took a long pull. Then he leaned against the railing, looking out at the darkening fields. Beautiful night. They usually are this time of year. I studied him. He seemed tense, though he was trying to hide it. Kept shifting his weight, checking his phone. "You said you needed those tools from the barn." "Yeah, the socket set. Starting that restaurant project next week, need to do some assembly work." I nodded. The restaurant project. The one I'd given him $5,000 for just yesterday. "How's that coming along?" "Good, real good." He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Actually, that's part of why I'm here. Got a meeting in Chicago tomorrow, big investors. Gonna be there through Thursday. 3 days in Chicago. That's some meeting. These guys are thorough. Want to see everything, check all the numbers." He took another drink. "But it's gonna pay off, Dad. I can feel it." I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to. But something in his manner, the way he wouldn't quite meet my eyes, the tension in his shoulders, set off alarm bells I couldn't quite name. Well, I hope it works out. We sat in silence for a moment, listening to crickets tune up their evening song. Then Tucker pushed off the railing and looked down at the yard. Man, those leaves are really piling up," he said, casual as you please. "You want me to rake them before I go? Won't take long." My hand tightened around the beer bottle. "No need, I'll get to it. Dad, there's gotta be 4 inches of leaves down there." He gestured at the yard. "You leave them much longer, they'll kill the grass underneath. Smother it." He wasn't wrong. That was exactly what happened. If you let leaves sit too long, they formed a mat that blocked sunlight and trapped moisture. It was the kind of thing every farmer knew, the kind of thing I'd taught Tucker when he was 12. "I know," I said slowly, "but I'm not ready to deal with them yet. It'll take me 20 minutes. I've got time before I head out." "Tucker," I kept my voice level, "I appreciate the offer, but I'll handle it when I'm ready." He studied me for a long moment, and I saw confusion flicker across his face. This wasn't like me. I'd always been the type to stay on top of maintenance. Letting the leaves sit made no sense from his perspective. "Okay," he said finally, "your call." But there was something in his eyes, a flash of frustration maybe, or calculation that made my skin prickle. It came and went so fast, I might have imagined it. "Yet let me grab those tools," I said, standing. We walked across the yard together, leaves crunching under our boots. The barn door creaked as I pulled it open. I found the socket set on the workbench right where it always was. "And here you go," I said, handing it over. "Thanks, Dad." Tucker took the case, tucked it under his arm. Then he paused, seeming to wrestle with something. Hey, I know I've been asking a lot of you lately. The money, the tools. I just want you to know I'm good for it. I'm gonna pay you back and then some. I know you will, son. He stepped forward and pulled me into a hug. I hugged him back, feeling the familiar shape of him, taller than me now, by a couple of inches broader through the shoulders. My boy grown into a man I sometimes didn't quite recognize. Love you, Dad, he said into my shoulder. Love you too. He held on maybe a second longer than usual, then released me and stepped back. His eyes were bright emotion, or maybe just the barn's overhead light reflecting funny. I'll call you from Chicago, he said. Drive safe. I walked him back to his car, watched him toss the tools in the trunk. He started the engine, gave me a wave through the window, and pulled out onto County Road 47. The taillights disappeared into the darkness, and I was alone again, with the crickets and the cooling air, and a yard full of leaves I'd been told not to touch. I stood there for a long time, staring at those leaves, thinking about Victor Blackwood's cold fingers on my arm, about the urgency in his voice, about how he'd known Tucker was coming tonight when I'd told no one. Finally, as the temperature dropped toward freezing, I went inside and locked the door. Checked it twice, which wasn't like me. Poured myself a whiskey I rarely drank. Sat at the kitchen table with the lights off, watching shadows move across the yard. As I lay in bed that night, I couldn't sleep. Tucker's request kept playing on repeat in my mind, along with Victor's warning. Something was happening, something I didn't understand yet. And whatever it was, it had everything to do with those leaves in my yard. The next morning broke cold and clear. I woke at my usual time, 5:30 a.m., but instead of my normal routine, I found myself drawn to the front window. What I saw there made my blood run cold. Two distinct tracks cut through the carpet of leaves in my front yard, as clear as if someone had painted them there. They ran from the gate curved around the side of the house and disappeared toward the back garden. In the early morning light, with frost beginning to glitter on the grass beneath those tracks, stood out like wounds. I was down the stairs and out the front door in less than a minute, not bothering with coffee or my jacket. The October air bit through my flannel shirt, but I barely noticed. My breath came out in white puffs as I stood at the edge of the porch staring. Tire tracks, clear as day. The leaves had done exactly what Victor Blackwood must have known they would do. They'd stuck to the tires of whatever vehicle had come through here, adhering to the rubber and creating two parallel paths where the leaves had been pulled away. The tracks were roughly 6 inches apart, consistent with a sedan or small SUV. I followed them slowly, my boots crunching on the undisturbed leaves to either side. The vehicle had entered through the gate, which I always left unlocked, never having had reason not to, and driven straight up toward the house. Then it had turned, following the path around to the back, where my garden sat. That's where the real story began to emerge. The tracks stopped at the garden's edge near the old split-rail fence that marked the boundary of my property. Here the vehicle had idled for some time, I could tell, from how the leaves had been blown back by the exhaust, creating a small clearing. And here, too, were footprints. Boot prints size 11 or 12, if I was any judge. 2 sets of them, both male, based on the depth and stride. They had walked from the vehicle to the fence, then back again, multiple times. The soil near the fence had been disturbed, freshly turned, though someone had tried to smooth it over again. I crouched down, examining the ground more carefully. The disturbed area was maybe 3 feet by 2 feet, like someone had been digging, or burying something. But there was nothing there now except freshly turned earth that someone had attempted to disguise. Then I saw the fence. The split-rail fence was old. I'd built it myself 20 years ago. And it had weathered to a silvery gray that blended with the landscape. But one section, about 4 feet long, looked different. Newer. The wood was the same weathered gray, but the joints... I ran my fingers along the join and felt the rough edge of a fresh cut. Someone had sawed through the rails, then put them back together with cheap L-brackets you could buy at any hardware store. It was a decent patch job if you weren't looking closely, but I'd built this fence with my own hands. I knew every inch of it. Someone had cut through my fence, done something in my garden in the middle of the night, then poorly repaired it and driven away. My phone came out of my pocket almost without conscious thought. I wasn't good with technology. Mary had always handled that. But I knew how to take pictures. I documented everything: the tire tracks cutting through the leaves, the boot prints in the soil, the disturbed earth, the fresh saw marks on the fence. Each photo felt like evidence in a case I didn't yet understand. As I stood there in the cold dawn light, Victor Blackwood's words suddenly crystallized into perfect clarity. Don't rake the garden. Let the leaves lie where they fell. If I'd listened to Tucker last night, if I'd raked up those leaves like any sensible farmer would do, these tracks would be invisible. Gone. Whatever had happened here would have left no trace at all. The vehicle could have driven over bare grass, and I'd never have known it had been here. Victor had known someone was coming. He'd known they would drive onto my property, and he'd known that those leaves were the only thing that would prove it. But how? How could an old man I'd never met before yesterday know that someone was planning to trespass on my land the same night my son left town? How could he have known with such certainty that he'd grabbed my arm in a pharmacy and warned me with eyes that burned with urgency? I looked down at my phone at the photos I'd taken. Evidence of what exactly someone had been here? Yes. They dug in my garden, cut my fence, tried to cover their tracks. But to what end? The sun was fully up now, burning off the frost, and with the light came the cold realization that I was standing in the middle of something I didn't understand. Something planned, something deliberate. Someone had waited until Tucker left. They'd known he was leaving, or at least they'd known I'd be alone. They'd come in the middle of the night, done their work, and left. And Victor Blackwood had somehow known it would happen. The cattle needed feeding. The chicken coop needed cleaning. There were a dozen morning chores waiting for my attention. But I couldn't move. I stood there in my garden, staring at those tracks, feeling the weight of questions I couldn't answer, pressing down on my shoulders. Someone had been on my property in the middle of the night. Someone who knew Tucker would be gone. And Victor had known it would happen. But who and why? I needed answers, and I needed them fast. Later that day, unable to shake my unease, I decided to do some investigating of my own. If someone had been on my property last night, maybe one of the neighbors had seen something. But first I needed to look again. The morning's discovery had shocked me enough that I'd rushed through more focused on documenting than understanding. Now, with the sun higher and my mind clearer, I returned to the garden. The fence repair looked even worse in full daylight. Whoever had done it had used 4 cheap L-brackets, the clearance bin kind, and hadn't bothered to pre-drill the holes. The screws had split the weathered wood in places. It was the work of someone who either didn't know how or didn't care. I ran my fingers along the cut edge again. Clean. Made with a proper saw, then put back together in a hurry. Why? The disturbed soil told me nothing new, but I noticed something I'd missed earlier. Leading away from the fence back toward where the vehicle had parked were faint drag marks in the frost-hardened ground, like someone had been pulling something heavy. I took more pictures, though. I wasn't sure what good they'd do. By 2 o'clock, I'd finished my chores and changed into a clean shirt. Mrs. Virginia Turner lived 3 properties down County Road 47 in a tidy ranch house that her late husband had built back in the 80s. She'd been widowed for a decade now, but kept the place immaculate. I'd known Virginia since she and Harold moved in. She brought us a casserole when Mary got sick, and another one after the funeral. Good people, the Turners. She answered on my second knock, a small woman with white hair cut short and practical. Reading glasses hung from a chain around her neck. "Whitaker Sullivan," she said, smiling. "What brings you by? Nothing wrong, I hope." "Actually, Virginia, I was wondering if I could ask you something about last night." Her smile faded. Come in, I'll make tea." Her living room had photos of grandchildren on every surface and a tabby cat curled on the couch. She gestured me to a chair while she disappeared into the kitchen. "Now," she said, returning with 2 cups. "What happened last night? Did you notice anything unusual? Any vehicles you didn't recognize?" She settled into her chair, studying me over her teacup. "Funny you should ask. I was up late, my hip was bothering me, and I saw a vehicle go past around 11:30, driving slow, no headlights." My pulse quickened. "No headlights?" "Well, they had them on dim, like they didn't want to wake people up." She paused. "It's why I noticed. Nobody drives past here that late unless they're lost or up to something." "What kind of vehicle?" "SUV, I think. Dark color, black or dark blue, maybe. Couldn't tell you the make. They all look the same to me these days." "Did you see which way it went, Wolf? Make it the all is opposed. Toward your place," she said quietly. I watched it pass, and it didn't come back for quite a while. Hour, maybe more. She set down her teacup. "Whitaker, what's going on?" "Someone was on my property last night. Cut through my fence, did some digging in the garden." I kept my voice level. "I'm trying to figure out who and why." Her eyes widened. "That's terrible. Have you called Sheriff Hendricks?" "Not yet. I wanted to gather some information first." I leaned forward. "Virginia, I know you have that security camera by your driveway. Any chance it caught something?" "Oh." She stood immediately. "You should have said, yes, I've got one of those Ring cameras. Harold insisted we get it after there was that string of break-ins over in Douglas County. Let me check." She led me to a small desk where a laptop sat. Her fingers moved across the keyboard as she pulled up the app and scrolled back to the previous night. "Here," she said, clicking on a video file. 11:17 p.m. The footage was grainy, but clear enough. A dark SUV Toyota or similar rolled past her driveway with its lights barely on. Two people visible in the front seats, but too dark to make out features. The vehicle moved at maybe 10 miles per hour, cautious. "Can you fast forward?" I asked. She clicked ahead, stopping at 12:43 a.m. The same SUV passed again this time, moving faster, headlights still dim, going the opposite direction, away from my property. "Can I get a copy of this?" "Of course." She fumbled with the controls. "I think I can save it to a USB drive. Give me just a minute." While she worked, I studied the frozen frame. The angle was wrong to catch the license plate, and the image quality wasn't good enough to identify the occupants. But it was proof. Solid time-stamped proof that someone had driven past toward my property at 11:17 p.m. and returned at 12:43 a.m., almost exactly when those tracks must have been made. Here you go," Virginia said, handing me a small flash drive. "It's all on there. Whitaker, I really think you should call Paul Hendricks. This sounds serious." "I will," I assured her. "Thank you, Virginia. This helps more than you know." She walked me to the door, her hand on my arm. "You be careful. People who sneak around in the middle of the night, cutting fences, they're not up to anything good." "I know." The walk back to my place took 10 minutes, and with every step my mind churned. Two people, dark SUV. Knew exactly when to come after Tucker left. Stayed on my property for an hour and a half doing God knows what. Mrs. Turner agreed to save the footage for me. As I walked back home, my mind raced. Two people had trespassed on my property in the middle of the night, and I had a feeling Tucker knew exactly who they were. That evening, Mrs. Turner called me. "Whitaker," she said, her voice tense, "I think you should come look at the video again." I noticed something. I grabbed my jacket and drove over immediately. The sun had already set by the time I reached her house. The porch light was on, and she opened the door before I could knock worry written all over her face. "I couldn't stop thinking about it," she said, leading me inside. "After you left, I kept watching the footage. There's something I missed the first time." Her laptop was open on the desk. The video paused on a single frame. She pointed at the screen. "Look here. When the vehicle turns, the streetlight catches the side." At first, I didn't see it. The image was grainy dark. She advanced the video frame by frame, and then it appeared just for a few seconds as the SUV turned onto my driveway. The streetlight illuminated the driver's side door. There was a logo, white lettering against dark paint. "Zoom in," I said. She enlarged the image. The pixels blurred, but the words were still clear enough to read. Midwest Property Group. Below it was smaller text, probably a phone number or website, but the company name was unmistakable. "A real estate company," Virginia said softly. "Why would a real estate company be at your farm in the middle of the night?" That was exactly what I was thinking. "Can you replay it? Show me the people again." She rewound to when the SUV first appeared and played it in slow motion. Two figures sat in the front seats. Both looked like men from their builds. When they passed under the streetlight, more details emerged. The driver wore a dark jacket. The passenger closer to the camera wore something lighter, possibly a button-down shirt. He held something flat against his chest. "Pause it," I said. She froze the frame. "That's a clipboard," I said. The passenger's holding a clipboard. We watched the return footage from 12:43 a.m. The angle was worse as they drove away, but details were still visible. The passenger still had the clipboard. Now the driver carried a bag slung over his shoulder, dark canvas, maybe a tool bag. "What were they doing?" Virginia whispered. "I don't know," I said, "but I'm going to find out." I pulled out my phone and searched Midwest Property Group, Lawrence, Kansas. The results loaded instantly. The company had a polished website, photos of farmland smiling clients, glowing testimonials. The About Us page featured a man in his mid-50s balding, wearing an expensive suit. "Philip Garrison," I read aloud. "Director, specializing in agricultural land acquisition and development." Virginia leaned closer. "Agricultural land? I don't know what it means yet," I said, but my stomach tightened. "A real estate company. Two men, a clipboard, a bag, a cut fence, all in the middle of the night." "You need to call Sheriff Hendricks," Virginia said firmly. "This isn't right." "I will," I said, "but I want to look into this company first." She placed a hand on my arm. "Be careful, Whitaker. People who sneak around at night cutting fences aren't honest people." "I know." I handed her the USB drive. Can you save the footage with the logo too? Of course. A few minutes later, she gave it back. I marked the timestamps where the logo is clearest. Thank you, I said. This helps more than you know. As she walked me to the door, her worry deepened. Promise me you'll be smart about this. I promise. The walk home felt longer than usual. The October air was cold clouds hiding the stars. My breath fogged as I walked, my thoughts racing. Why would Midwest Property Group come to my farm at midnight? What were they measuring? Surveying, planning? And Tucker? The timing gnawed at me. He'd been here the day before, oddly insistent that I rake the leaves. Then he'd left town for 3 days. That same night, these men appeared. It couldn't be coincidence. Back home, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, the one Mary had insisted I buy years ago. I pulled up the company's website again and read everything: services, projects, mission statements, full of polished language about maximizing land value and strategic growth opportunities. I read Philip Garrison's bio: 30 years in real estate, licensed in Kansas and Missouri, member of multiple professional organizations. The photo showed him shaking hands with a politician at a ribbon cutting. Nothing openly criminal, nothing that explained midnight trespassing. But the more I read, the more uneasy I felt. Legitimate businesses don't sneak onto private land, they don't cut fences, they don't operate under cover of darkness. I opened Google Maps and found their office a building on Massachusetts Street in downtown Lawrence, a respectable address surrounded by shops and restaurants. That's where I'd go tomorrow. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark kitchen, listening to the house settle. The refrigerator hummed, pipes creaked softly. Outside, wind moved through the trees, and somewhere far off, a coyote howled. Victor Blackwood's warning echoed in my head. Don't rake the leaves. What did he know? How did he know? And what was buried beneath those leaves that someone was desperate to find? Tomorrow I would confront Philip Garrison and demand answers. But tonight I sat alone with my questions, staring into the darkness and wondering how many secrets my son had buried both in the soil and in my life. The following morning, I drove into downtown Lawrence with a knot in my stomach. The Midwest Property Group office sat in a modern glass building on Massachusetts Street. As I pushed through the door, I had no idea I was about to uncover the first layer of my son's betrayal. The lobby was all chrome and polished marble floors, leather chairs, a reception desk that gleamed. A young woman looked up from her computer, professional smile in place. Can I help you? I need to speak with someone about a property appraisal. County Road 47, the Sullivan Farm. Her fingers flew across her keyboard. Let me get Mr. Garrison for you. She disappeared through a door. I stood there, hands in my pockets, studying framed photos on the walls. Farmland turned into shopping centers. Each one probably made someone rich while erasing another family's history. Mr. Sullivan. I turned to find a man in his mid-50s approaching. Balding, expensive suit, confident smile. Philip Garrison, Director of Acquisitions. Please come to my office. His handshake was firm, practiced. His office matched the lobby glass, desk leather, everything. He gestured to a chair while settling into his own, pulling up something on his computer. The County Road 47 property. Beautiful piece of land. Your son Tucker has been very proactive about this sale. What exactly has Tucker told you? I asked. His smile dimmed slightly. He contacted us about 3 weeks ago. Said you were looking to retire, wanted to downsize. He provided the power of attorney and asked us to handle the appraisal. 3 weeks. While I'd been going about my life, my son had been plotting to sell my farm. Can I see that power of attorney? Of course. He turned his monitor, then handed me a printed copy. Everything's in order, notarized and filed properly. I stared at the document. My name, Whitaker Robert Sullivan. The address correct. Legal description accurate. And at the bottom, a signature that looked remarkably like mine. But it wasn't. Mr. Garrison, I never signed this document. I'm sorry. This is a forgery. I pulled out my wallet, extracted my driver's license, and laid it next to the power of attorney. Look at my signature here. Now look at that one. He leaned forward, studying both. The signatures were similar. Whoever did it knew my handwriting, but the differences were there. The loop on the J too wide. The cross on the T in Sullivan angled wrong. These aren't the same, he said quietly. No, they're not. I never signed anything. I never authorized any sale. And I never gave my son permission to act on my behalf. His face paled. He picked up his phone. Kelly, get me Kyle and Marcus. I need them in my office now. He hung up, looking at me with alarm. Mr. Sullivan, if what you're saying is true, it's true. Then we have a serious problem. Except that you sent people to my property at 11 o'clock at night, I said. What? Two of your employees, Monday night. They drove onto my land, cut through my fence, spent over an hour doing God knows what. We did have a late appraisal scheduled. Your son said you went to bed early, asked if we could come after hours to avoid disturbing you. It was unusual, but he offered to pay extra. How much extra? $500. $500 to get appraisers onto my land while I slept. Except, I hadn't been sleeping, I'd been sitting in my kitchen, because Victor Blackwood had warned me not to rake the leaves. The door opened, and two men entered, both in their 30s, wearing company polo shirts. Kyle and Marcus, according to their name tags. Did you conduct an after-hours appraisal at the Sullivan property Monday night? Garrison asked. Kyle nodded. Yes, sir. Mr. Sullivan's son requested it. Said his father had mobility issues. Mobility issues, I said flatly. I'm 68, not 90. We drove out around 11, Marcus added. Did a site assessment, soil samples, fence measurements, water access? Standard procedure just after dark. Did you cut through my fence? They exchanged glances. The back section was easier to access that way. We repaired it before we left. With L brackets and screws that split the wood, I said. Garrison's hands were flat on his desk. Mr. Sullivan, I apologize. This is highly irregular and completely unacceptable. You should have known, I interrupted. Legitimate property sales don't happen at midnight. He nodded slowly. You're absolutely right. What can we do to make this right? And first, cancel everything. No sale, no listing, no further contact with Tucker. I pulled out my phone. Second, I need copies of everything. The forged power of attorney, the appraisal request, any emails with Tucker payment records. All of it. Of course. He was already typing. Kelly can have that ready in 10 minutes. While we waited, I studied the three men before me. They weren't criminals, just businessmen who'd been played by someone they'd believed was legitimate. Kelly brought in a folder thick with documents. I flipped through them, my stomach turning with each page. Tucker's email address, the fake power of attorney. Payment receipts showing cash transactions. A preliminary listing price, $1,200,000. My farm reduced to numbers on a page. Is there anything else? Garrison asked quietly. Yes, don't contact Tucker about this meeting. Don't tell him I was here. We can, but you should contact the authorities. This is fraud, forgery. I know what it is. I'll handle it. As I walked out of that office with a folder full of evidence, my hands were shaking. Not from fear, from rage. My own son had tried to sell my farm out from under me, and this was just the beginning. I needed to know how deep this betrayal went. Back at the farm, I spread all the documents across my kitchen table. The forged signature, the emails, the appraisal request. Each piece of evidence was another nail in the coffin of my trust. But I needed to understand why. What had driven Tucker to this? The afternoon light slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the papers. I made coffee I didn't drink and sat down to examine every page, every detail as methodically as I'd approach any farm problem. Except, this wasn't a broken fence or a sick cow. This was my son trying to steal my life. The timeline told its own story. The first email from Tucker to Midwest Property Group was dated September 28th, 3 weeks ago. Subject line, inquiry regarding agricultural property sale. Professional businesslike. He'd introduced himself as acting on behalf of my father, who is interested in downsizing for retirement. Retirement. I was 68 and still running 240 acres on my own. The word was a convenient lie. The second email dated October 1st included the forged power of attorney as an attachment. Tucker had scanned it, sent it off as casually as if it were legitimate. The notary stamp was from someone in Kansas City, a place I'd never been, certainly hadn't signed anything. Each subsequent email showed Tucker coordinating details, the appraisal date, the after-hours arrangement, the $500 cash payment. He'd thought of everything. Planned it all while sitting across from me on that porch drinking my beer, looking me in the eye and lying. I pulled out my bank statements, something I'd been meaning to review anyway. There it was, the $5,000 check I'd written him last Sunday. Memo line, restaurant investment. The check had cleared Monday morning. Fast. Like he'd needed that money immediately. But for what? If he was planning to sell my farm for $1.2 million, why did he need $5,000? I opened my laptop, the old one Mary had insisted I learn to use, and typed Tucker Sullivan Restaurant Franchise into Google, then tried Tucker Sullivan Business Chicago, then just his name with Kansas. Nothing. No business registrations, no restaurant ventures, no investor meetings. The phone number he'd given me, the one he said, was for the franchise headquarters. I'd written it on a post-it note stuck to the fridge. I dialed it now. "The number you have reached is not in service. Please check the number and try again." I set the phone down carefully, though part of me wanted to throw it across the room. Everything was a lie. Every word he'd said about the restaurant, the investors, the Chicago, meeting all of it fabricated. And I'd believed him because he was my son, and you want to believe your children. You want to think you raised them right. But I'd raised a liar, or he'd become one somewhere along the way, and I'd missed it. I thought about the past few months looking for signs I'd overlooked. Tucker, visiting more often than usual, but I'd been pleased by that thought. Maybe he was finally appreciating family after his mother's death. Him asking questions about the farm's value, the property lines, the water rights. But that had seemed like natural interest in his inheritance. Inheritance. That's what this was about, wasn't it? He didn't want to wait for me to die. He wanted it now. But why? What was so urgent that he'd forge documents, hire midnight appraisers, deceive his own father? The debt. There had to be a debt. Something big enough, pressing enough to make a man commit fraud against his family. Gambling, maybe. Bad investments. Something he was ashamed of. Something he couldn't tell me about directly. So instead, he'd tried to steal from me. I sat there as the afternoon bled into evening papers, spread before me like pieces of a puzzle I hadn't wanted to solve. And through it all, one question kept circling back. How had Victor Blackwood known? An old man I'd never met who appeared in a pharmacy and warned me with cryptic words that saved everything. Don't rake the garden. Such a strange, specific warning. As if he'd known exactly what Tucker was planning. Known the timeline, known that those leaves were my only defense. I'd have to find Victor again, thank him properly, ask him how he'd known, but first I had to deal with Tucker. Tomorrow? Tucker had said he'd be back Thursday, home from his fake Chicago trip to his fake investor meetings for his fake restaurant franchise. He had walked through that door expecting to find his trusting father none the wiser about the machinery turning in the background to steal his land. But I would be waiting, not as his trusting father anymore, but as a man who'd been betrayed by his own blood. I gathered the documents into a neat stack, returned them to the folder. Tomorrow, I'd show Tucker everything. Give him a chance to explain, though. I couldn't imagine what explanation could justify this. Maybe he'd confess, throw himself on my mercy. Maybe there was some desperate circumstance I didn't know about yet. Or maybe this betrayal went deeper than I feared. Maybe there was more I hadn't discovered yet. More lies, more schemes, more ways he'd been working behind my back. The kitchen had grown dark while I'd been sitting there. I didn't bother turning on the lights. Just sat in the shadows looking at the folder that held proof of my son's crime, wondering how we'd gotten here. Tucker was supposed to return tomorrow, and when he walked through that door, I would be ready. Not as his trusting father anymore, but as a man who'd been betrayed by his own blood. The question was, would he confess, or would this betrayal go even deeper than I feared? Thursday morning arrived gray and cold. Tucker's Audi pulled into the driveway at exactly 10 a.m., right on schedule. I watched from the kitchen window as my son stepped out checking his phone, relaxed and confident, completely unaware of what waited for him inside. I had been sitting at the kitchen table since dawn, the folder of documents laid out in front of me. I'd rehearsed this moment again and again, searching for words that didn't exist. How do you confront your own child with proof of betrayal? How do you ask why he tried to destroy you? The door opened. "Dad." "You home?" Tucker called, cheerful. In the kitchen, he appeared in the doorway with an easy smile, an overnight bag slung over his shoulder. He looked good, rested, like a man whose plans were unfolding exactly as intended. "Hey," he said, stepping forward for a hug. "Chicago was great. The investors loved the pitch. I think we're really going to." He stopped when he saw the papers on the table. "What's all this?" "Sit down, Tucker." Something in my voice made his smile fade. "Dad." "What's wrong?" "Sit down." He pulled out a chair slowly. I could see the calculation behind his eyes, measuring what I knew and how much danger he was in. I slid the forged power of attorney across the table. "Explain this." He picked it up. The color drained from his face. His fingers trembled. "Where did you get this?" "From Midwest Property Group, the company you hired to sell my farm." "Dad, I can explain." "You forged my signature," I said, my voice steady despite the anger rising inside me. "You tried to sell my property without my consent." "It's not like that." "Then what is it like, Tucker? Because it looks like fraud. It looks like you tried to steal everything I've built." He set the document down and ran his hands through his hair. For a brief moment, I thought he might confess. Instead, his jaw hardened. "You don't understand." "Then explain it." "I need this money," he snapped. "You have no idea what kind of pressure I'm under, what kind of debts I have. So, you steal from your father." "It's not stealing." He stood abruptly, the chair scraping loudly. "I'm your son. This place is going to be mine someday anyway. Why should I have to wait until you die?" The words struck harder than any blow. I stood to face him. "Because it's mine," I said. "Because your mother and I spent 40 years building this, and you wanted to sell it like it meant nothing." "It's not nothing. It's worth over $1 million. His voice rose. "Do you know what I could do with that money?" "You don't build anything," I replied. "You lie. You forge documents. You sneak around arranging appraisals behind my back." "I had a plan," he shouted. "Buyers were lined up. We could have closed in 2 months. You'd retire somewhere nice, and everyone would be taken care of." "Everyone except me," I said, "because I never agreed to any of it." He stared at me, breathing hard. And for the first time in my life, I saw contempt in my son's eyes. "You're being ridiculous," he said coldly. "You're 68 running this place alone. How long do you think you can keep going? 5 years? 10? You're going to work yourself to death out of stubbornness. That's my choice. And it affects me," he shot back. "I'm your only child. I have a right." "You have no rights here," I interrupted. "Not to my land, not to my decisions, and not to my signature." He laughed sharp and bitter. "Fine. Keep your precious farm. See if I care." "Is that all this was about?" I asked. "Money. What else is there?" He grabbed his bag. "I tried to help you, Dad. I tried to make sure you were taken care of. If you want to be stubborn, that's on you. You tried to help yourself." He turned toward the door, then stopped and looked back. The expression on his face made my stomach tighten. "You're going to regret this," he said quietly. "When you're old and alone, too proud to ask for help, you'll remember this moment and you'll wish you'd listened." "The only thing I regret," I said just as quietly, "is not seeing who you really were sooner." He stood there a moment longer, fists clenched, then walked out. The door slammed hard enough to rattle the windows. I moved to the sink and watched through the window as his Audi backed down the driveway, tires spinning on gravel. He didn't look back. The silver car disappeared down County Road 47, leaving only dust behind. The house felt emptier than it ever had, even emptier than those first months after Mary died. As I stood there, his last words echoed in my mind. "You're going to regret this." It didn't sound like a warning. It sounded like a threat. And deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Not even close. Hours after Tucker left, I sat alone in the house that suddenly felt too big, too quiet. I'd given my son a chance to come clean, to apologize, to make things right. Instead, he'd threatened me. The time for second chances was over. I picked up the phone and dialed Sheriff Paul Hendricks. The afternoon had passed in a strange fog. I'd tried to do my normal chores, feed the cattle, check the water troughs, repair a section of fence that needed attention, but my hands moved through the motions while my mind stayed fixed on that confrontation. On Tucker's face when he realized I knew. On the contempt in his eyes when he told me I'd regret this. Mary would have known what to do. She always did. I found myself at the photo on the mantle, the one from our 30th anniversary. Her smile so alive it still hurt to look at 5 years later. What would you tell me, sweetheart?" I asked the empty room. The answer came as clearly as if she'd spoken, "Protect yourself, Mr. Sullivan. Our son made his choice." She was right. She'd always been right. I picked up the phone and called Virginia Turner first. "Virginia, it's Whitaker. That USB drive you gave me, I need it. I'm going to the police." There was a pause then. "Oh, Whitaker, I'm so sorry it's come to this. Of course. Come by whenever you need it. I'll be there in 10 minutes. She was waiting on her porch when I pulled up the USB drive in a small envelope. She pressed it into my hands, her own warm and papery. "You're doing the right thing," she said. "I know it doesn't feel like it, but you are. Doesn't feel like much of anything right now, except wrong. That boy made his choices. You didn't make them for him." She squeezed my hand. "Paul Hendricks is a good man. He'll handle this properly." I nodded, not trusting my voice, and drove into Lawrence. The sheriff's office sat in a brick building on the edge of downtown next to the courthouse. I'd known Paul Hendricks for 15 years. We'd served on the county agriculture board together, shared coffee at the diner most Saturday mornings. Good man, fair man, but I'd never thought I'd be walking into his office to file a report against my own son. The receptionist showed me back immediately when I gave my name. Paul's office was small and cluttered, file boxes stacked in corners, citations pinned to a corkboard, photos of his wife and grandchildren on the desk. He stood when I entered, his weathered face shifting from friendly greeting to concern. Whitaker. Linda said you needed to talk. Everything all right? Best boss fantasies. Mein bull for pastel. No, Paul, it's not. I sat down heavily in the chair across from his desk. I need to file a report against Tucker. His expression went serious. Your son, what happened? Where to even start? I pulled out the folder of documents, set them on his desk. Then, the USB drive. 3 weeks ago, Tucker contacted a real estate company about selling my farm. He forged a power of attorney with my signature arranged for appraisers to come to my property in the middle of the night and tried to sell everything without my knowledge. Paul opened the folder, started reading. His jaw tightened as he looked at each document. This is serious, Whitaker. I know. Forgery, fraud, criminal trespass. He looked up at me. Your son could face felony charges. You understand that? I understand. My voice came out steady, though my hands wanted to shake. But there's more. 4 days ago, a stranger warned me, told me not to rake the leaves in my yard. I didn't understand why until I found tire tracks the next morning, tracks that would have been invisible if I'd cleared those leaves. I told him everything. Victor Blackwood at the pharmacy, the tracks in the leaves, Virginia's security footage, the forged signature, the confrontation that morning. Tucker's threat as he left. Paul listened, taking notes, his expression growing grimmer with each detail. The video shows the company vehicle, he asked. Clear as day, logo on the door, timestamp, everything. He plugged the USB into his computer, pulled up the footage. I watched him watch. It saw his professional mask slip for just a moment when the Midwest Property Group logo appeared. They admitted it. The appraisers? In front of their boss. Tucker paid them $500 cash to come after hours. Paul sat back in his chair, exhaling slowly. Whitaker, this is one hell of a case. Multiple felonies, conspiracy, and the defendant is your son. I know what he is. Are you sure you want to do this? Once I start this investigation, once we file charges, there's no taking it back. I thought about Tucker's face that morning. The contempt, the entitlement, the absolute certainty that he had a right to my property, my life's work, just because he was my son. I'm sure, I said. I gave him a chance to explain this morning. He didn't apologize. He didn't show remorse. He threatened me, Paul. My own son told me I'd regret standing in his way. Paul nodded slowly. Then I'll open an investigation. I'll need to interview the people at Midwest Property Group and get official statements. I'll need to speak with Mrs. Turner about her footage. This is going to take time to build properly. How much time? A few weeks, probably. We'll do this right, get warrants, document everything. When we bring charges, they'll stick. A few weeks. Tucker would still be out there free knowing I'd discovered his scheme. The thought made something cold settle in my chest. In the meantime, Paul said, you be careful. I don't want to alarm you, but people who commit fraud like this, sometimes they don't take exposure well. He already threatened me once. Then take precautions, lock your doors, vary your routine, and call me if anything feels off. I stood suddenly exhausted. Thanks, Paul. Whitaker. He came around the desk, put a hand on my shoulder. You're doing the right thing. I know it doesn't feel like it, but you are. The same words Virginia had said. I wanted to believe them. As I drove home that evening, I felt a strange mix of relief and dread. I'd done the right thing, I knew that. But I'd also just set in motion events that would tear my family apart forever. And somewhere in the back of my mind, Victor Blackwood's voice whispered, this is only the beginning. 2 weeks passed after I filed the police report. Sheriff Hendricks said the investigation would take time, interviews, forensics, building a case. In the meantime, I tried to return to my normal routine, but my body had other plans. It started with fatigue, then came the dizziness. The first week I chalked it up to stress. Filing charges against your own son will do that to a man. I'd wake at my usual 5:30, but getting out of bed felt like pushing through concrete. The morning chores, feeding cattle, collecting eggs, checking the irrigation, left me winded in ways they never had before. Getting old. I told myself, though, 68 had never felt like this. By the second week, new symptoms appeared. Dizziness when I stood up too fast, my heart beating irregular like it couldn't decide on a rhythm, a tremor in my hands that made morning coffee dangerous. I dropped a mug one morning, watched it shatter on the kitchen floor, and had to sit down before cleaning it up. The Robinsons noticed first. They stopped by to drop off some venison from their freezer, found me sitting on the porch in the middle of the afternoon. Whitaker, you feeling all right? Mr. Robinson asked, concern creasing his weathered face. You look pale. Just tired, I said. Haven't been sleeping well. Mrs. Robinson exchanged a look with her husband. Maybe you should see Dr. Reynolds. Get yourself checked out. I will if it doesn't get better. But I didn't go. Farmers don't go to doctors for feeling tired. We push through. Besides, I knew what was causing its stress from the investigation, the weight of what I'd done to Tucker, the constant knot of worry about what came next. What I didn't know was that someone was making sure I got worse. Brittany started visiting 3 days after I filed the report. Tucker's wife, 35 years old, with her practiced smile and concerned eyes. She showed up on a Sunday afternoon carrying a casserole dish. "Dad Whitaker," she said at the door. She'd never called me that before. It had always been a polite Mr. Sullivan. "I hope you don't mind me coming by. I know things with Tucker are difficult right now, but I wanted you to know I still care about you." I hesitated, but she looked so earnest standing there on my porch. "Yes, come in," I said. She set the casserole on the counter. Chicken and rice, she said, Tucker's favorite. We sat at the kitchen table, and she talked about wanting to be a bridge between father and son. About how Tucker was under so much stress making bad decisions, but he still loved me. About family being more important than anything. It was a good performance. I almost believed it. She started coming by 2, sometimes 3 times a week, always bringing something homemade cookies, one visit soup the next, fresh bread still warm from her oven. Each time she'd sit with me for a while, asking about the farm, my health, whether I'd heard anything from the investigation. I ate what she brought because turning down food felt rude, and because some part of me wanted to believe that maybe she really did care. Maybe not everyone in Tucker's life had turned against me. What I didn't notice was how the symptoms got worse after her visits, how the tremor in my hands intensified, how the dizziness came in waves that left me gripping the counter for balance. I kept taking my heart medication every morning, the same prescription I'd been on for 3 years, the little white pills in the orange bottle from Baxter's Pharmacy. I trusted that bottle, trusted the system, trusted that at least this one thing in my life was constant and reliable. Virginia Turner came by one afternoon in the second week, found me struggling to lift a feed bag into the truck. "Whitaker Sullivan, you look terrible," she said flatly. "When's the last time you ate a proper meal? Brittany brought soup yesterday." Tucker's wife, her expression sharpened. "She's been coming around a couple times a week, says she wants to help mend things between me and Tucker." Virginia's mouth pressed into a thin line. "And you believe her?" "I don't know what I believe anymore." She helped me load the feed bag, then stood there with her hands on her hips. "You need to see a doctor. This isn't just stress, Whitaker. Something's wrong. I'll go next week if it doesn't improve. And see that you do." She squeezed my arm before leaving. "Ann Whitaker, be careful who you trust." The words stuck with me, but I didn't understand them. Not then. By the end of the second week, I could barely make it through morning chores. The cattle had to wait an extra hour to be fed, because I needed to rest after checking the chicken coop. My hands shook so badly I struggled to grip the rake. The dizziness came in waves strong enough that I had to sit down, wherever I was, in the barn, on the porch, once in the middle of the field. The Robinsons started checking on me daily. Virginia called twice a day. Even old Walter from the feed store asked if I was feeling all right when I came in for supplies. "You sure you should be driving?" he'd asked, watching me grip the counter for balance. I wasn't sure, but I didn't know what else to do. Thursday afternoon of that second week, Brittany stopped by with more cookies. I was sitting at the kitchen table, too exhausted to pretend otherwise. "Oh, Dad Whitaker," she said, all concern. "You really don't look well. Have you been to a doctor?" "Not yet." "You should go, really. I worry about you out here all alone." She left the cookies on the counter, chocolate chip fresh and warm. After she drove away, I ate 3 of them with coffee I could barely hold steady. By the end of the second week, I could barely make it through morning chores. Something was wrong, seriously wrong. But I never imagined that the answer sat in a little orange bottle on my bathroom counter, and that someone I'd welcomed into my home was slowly poisoning me. 3 weeks after I filed that police report, I collapsed in the barn while feeding the cattle. The Robinsons found me an hour later, barely conscious. That's when everything started to unravel, when the second layer of my son's betrayal came into the light. I don't remember much about the collapse itself. One moment I was pouring feed into the trough, watching the steam rise from the cattle's breath in the cold morning air. The next, my vision blurred, my legs buckled, and the ground was rushing up to meet me. Everything went dark. When I opened my eyes, I was staring at ceiling tiles and fluorescent lights. The steady beep of a heart monitor filled my ears. My mouth was dry, my arms felt heavy, and there was an IV line taped to my hand. The antiseptic smell of the hospital made my stomach turn. Mr. Sullivan. A woman's voice, calm and professional. Can you hear me? I turned my head slowly. A doctor in a white coat stood beside my bed, her gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her name tag read, Dr. Barbara Reynolds. What happened? My voice came out rough, barely above a whisper. You collapsed, she said gently. Your neighbor found you in your barn and called 911. You've been unconscious for about 2 hours. 2 hours. I tried to sit up, but she placed a firm hand on my shoulder. Easy, you need to rest. We've been running tests and we found something concerning. She pulled up a chair and sat down, her expression serious. Mr. Sullivan, your blood work shows dangerously high levels of digoxin. Your serum concentration is at 4.2 nanograms per milliliter. The therapeutic range is 0.5 to 2. You're well into toxic territory. Dexon, I frowned. I don't take that. I know. That's what concerns me. She folded her hands in her lap. Digoxin is a heart medication, but it's not what you're prescribed. According to your medical records, you take a tenolol for your blood pressure. Digoxin is much stronger and much more dangerous if taken incorrectly. At the levels in your system, you could have had a fatal arrhythmia. My mind struggled to catch up. Are you saying someone gave me the wrong medicine? I'm saying someone gave you medicine you shouldn't have been taking at all. Her eyes held mine. Mr. Sullivan, digoxin poisoning doesn't happen by accident. Either someone made a serious error at the pharmacy or, she paused, or someone deliberately substituted your medication. The barn, the collapse, Brittany's visits. I saw her face in my mind, the way she'd smiled when she handed me those chocolate chip cookies still warm from the oven. The way she'd opened my medication cabinet and organized everything so it's easier for you to find Dad. The way she'd stood in my kitchen every single time, watching me take my pills with a glass of water. Don't forget your heart medication. She'd say, her voice sweet and caring. You know how important it is to take it every day. And I'd thanked her. God help me, I'd thanked her for caring. Who has access to your medication? Dr. Reynolds asked. Just me. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. And my daughter-in-law, she's been helping me around the house. Dr. Reynolds nodded slowly, then stood. I need to make a call. Please don't try to leave the room. 20 minutes later, Sheriff Paul Hendricks walked through the door, his face grim. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. Mr. Sullivan, Dr. Reynolds filled me in. I'm heading to your place right now to collect that pill bottle. We'll have it tested. He pulled out a small notepad. Who's had access to your house in the last few weeks? Brittany, I said quietly. Tucker's wife. She's been coming by 2 or 3 times a week, bringing food, checking on me. I paused, the weight of it settling on my chest. She reorganized my medicine cabinet about 10 days ago. Hendricks wrote that down. Anyone else? The Robinsons, but they just waved from the fence line. Virginia Turner stopped by once to drop off some eggs. But Brittany? I closed my eyes. She's the only one who came inside regularly. She even knew exactly where I kept my pills. All right. Hendricks tucked the notepad away. I'll be back in a couple hours. Don't talk to anyone about this until we know more. He was true to his word. By late afternoon, he returned with a clear evidence bag containing my orange pill bottle. He sat down in the chair Dr. Reynolds had used earlier. Mr. Sullivan, we opened the bottle and examined the pills. Most of them are atenolol, your regular medication, but about a third of them are digoxin. Someone mixed them together. He held up the bag so I could see. We counted 42 pills total. 14 of them are digoxin. I stared at the bag. Those little white pills looked so harmless, so ordinary, but 1 in 3 had been slowly killing me. We found 2 sets of fingerprints on the bottle. Hendricks continued. Yours, obviously, and 1 other set. We'll need to run those through the system, but... He hesitated. Given what you've told me about Brittany's access to your house, I think we both know whose prints those are going to be. The room felt colder suddenly. She was trying to kill me. We'll know more after the lab results come back. But yes, Mr. Sullivan, that's what it looks like. He stood up. I'm posting a deputy outside your room tonight, just as a precaution. And when you're discharged, I don't want you going back to that farm alone. Not until we've made arrests. After he left, I lay there in the hospital bed, staring at the ceiling. The IV drip continued its steady rhythm. The heart monitor beeped. And I thought about Brittany's smile as she handed me those cookies. The way she'd insisted I eat. The way she'd reminded me to take my pills with such practiced concern. I thought about Tucker too. My son. The boy I'd raised taught to ride a bike, helped with homework. The man who'd looked me in the eye and asked for money while planning to forge my signature. Who'd threatened me when I stood up to him. Tucker hadn't given up when the forged documents failed. He'd just moved to Plan B. And this time, he wasn't trying to steal the farm. He was trying to kill me. 1 week after my collapse, Sheriff Hendricks called with news. "We have enough to make an arrest," he said. "Brittany's fingerprints are all over your pill bottle. And we found digoxin tablets in her car still in the pharmacy packaging from Lawrence Medical Supply." I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt a deep aching sadness. It was a Tuesday morning when they took her in. I wasn't there to see it, but Hendricks called me afterward to walk me through what they'd found. Brittany's fingerprints matched the ones on my medication bottle clear prints on the cap, and the label placed there when she'd carefully mixed those poison pills in with my real medication. The digoxin they found in her glove compartment came in a small amber bottle with no prescription label, the kind you'd get if you knew someone who could get medications without proper documentation. But that wasn't all. In the center console of her BMW, they found a small spiral notebook. Hendricks read me some of the entries over the phone. November 2, added 3 more pills. He didn't notice. November 5th, he's getting weaker, won't be long now. November 8, complained about dizziness. Good. My hands shook as I listened. She'd been documenting it, recording my decline like a science experiment. "There's also $500 cash in an envelope," Hendricks added. "New bills still in the bank wrapper. We're working on tracing where it came from, but given the timing and everything else." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Tucker had paid her, or promised to pay her. Either way, this wasn't just Brittany acting alone. "What happens now?" I asked. "She's being arraigned this afternoon. The DA's charging her with attempted murder, criminal poisoning, and elder abuse. Bail will probably be set pretty high, I'm guessing $250,000 or more. Her lawyer will argue she's not a flight risk, but with charges this serious." He paused. "Mr. Sullivan, she could be looking at 15 to 20 years if convicted. 15 to 20 years for trying to kill me. The woman who'd called me dad and baked cookies in my kitchen." 2 hours after Hendricks' call, my phone rang again. Tucker's name lit up the screen. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "This is insane." His voice exploded through the speaker before I could even say hello. "Brittany would never do something like this. She's being set up." "Set up," I repeated flatly. "Yes, someone planted that stuff in her car. She doesn't even know what digoxin is." His words came fast, desperate. "Dad, you have to tell them. You have to tell the police this is a mistake." For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Then I remembered the forged power of attorney, the midnight appraisers, his threat when I confronted him. And I remembered those entries in Brittany's notebook. "He's getting weaker, won't be long now. The only mistake," I said quietly, "was mine, for trusting you." And Dad. I hung up. My hands were still shaking. Hendricks came by that afternoon with more news. "We can hold Brittany on attempted murder charges," he said, standing in my kitchen where she'd stood so many times before smiling and handing me cookies. "The evidence is solid, but Tucker?" He shook his head. "We don't have enough yet to prove he was directly involved. The money could have been for anything. Without communications between them, without proof he knew what she was doing, the DA says we can't charge him. So he just walks free, for now." Hendricks' jaw tightened. "But I promise you, Mr. Sullivan, we're not done. We're getting warrants for his phone records, his bank accounts, everything. If there's a connection, we'll find it." After he left, I stood in my empty house and looked around. This place that had been my sanctuary, my home for 40 years, suddenly felt violated, unsafe. I thought about Brittany standing at this same counter watching me take those pills. I thought about Tucker sitting at this table, asking for money while planning to forge my name. By evening, word had spread through the community. Virginia Turner called, then the Robinsons, then Walter from the feed store. Everyone wanted to know if I was all right, if I needed anything. Their concern was genuine, but I could hear something else in their voices too. Shocked that something like this could happen here in our quiet corner of Kansas. Mrs. Gladys Morton, who ran the quilting circle Mary used to attend, stopped by with a casserole and tears in her eyes. "Mary would be heartbroken," she said, squeezing my hand. "But she'd also be proud of you for standing up to them." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Mary? God, what would she say if she could see what our son had become? The next day, I had new locks installed on every door. I set up security cameras around the property, 4 of them, covering all the approaches. I even got motion sensor lights for the barn and the driveway. The installer, a young guy from Lawrence, asked if I'd had a break-in. Something like that, I told him. But cameras and locks couldn't fix the real problem. I was living in fear on my own land, looking over my shoulder in my own home. And the worst part, my own son had made me feel this way. That night, I sat on the porch and watched the sun set over the fields. The same fields I'd worked for decades. The same view Mary and I had watched together countless times. But nothing looked the same anymore. Everything was tainted. My phone buzzed with a text from Virginia Turner, heard about the arrest. "Are you okay? Come over if you need company." I texted back that I was fine, but I wasn't, not really. Brittany was in a cell at the Douglas County Jail, awaiting her preliminary hearing. But Tucker was still out there free, and I knew deep in my gut that he wasn't done. A man who could forge documents and poison his own father wouldn't stop just because one plan had failed. I was right, the worst was still ahead. 2 days after Brittany's arrest, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Tucker hadn't called, hadn't tried to reach out. And that silence was more frightening than any threat he'd ever made. Sheriff Hendricks seemed to feel the same way. I barely slept those 2 nights. Every creak of the old house made me jump. Every shadow outside the window looked like a figure approaching. I had installed those security cameras, but now I found myself checking the feeds compulsively every hour then, every half hour then, constantly. The 4 screens sat on my kitchen table glowing in the dark, showing 4 different angles of my property. Nothing moved except the occasional deer or rabbit. But I couldn't relax, couldn't let my guard down. Wednesday afternoon, Hendricks called. "Mr. Sullivan, I wanted to give you a heads up. We've been monitoring Tucker's movement since the arrest." My hand tightened on the phone, and last night he met with someone, a man named Brett Blackwood. He paused. "We ran the name. Brett's got a record possession with intent to distribute trafficking charges that didn't stick. He's a mid-level dealer out of Kansas City, the kind of guy you don't meet unless you're looking to buy or sell something illegal. Brett Blackwood. The name meant nothing to me, but the implications were clear. Why would Tucker be meeting with a drug dealer? I asked, though I already knew the answer wasn't going to be good. "That's what concerns me," Hendricks said. "When people like Tucker get backed into a corner, wife arrested fraud charges pending investigation closing in, they get desperate. And desperate people do dangerous things." He let that sink in for a moment. "I want you to be extra careful, Mr. Sullivan. Keep your doors locked. Keep those cameras running. And if you see anything at all, you call me immediately. Don't try to handle it yourself." After he hung up, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, staring at those camera feeds. Tucker was meeting with drug dealers. What was he planning? I called Virginia Turner, told her to keep an eye out for any strange vehicles on County Road 47. She didn't ask questions, just said, "I'll watch for you, Mr. Sullivan. You stay safe." I made sure my phone was fully charged, made sure it was always within reach. I even started keeping it in my pocket when I went out to do the barn work, though my hands shook so badly some mornings I could barely feed the cattle. This wasn't how a man was supposed to live, not at 68, not on his own land. Thursday evening, just after sunset, Hendricks called again. His voice was tight, urgent. "Mr. Sullivan, we got an anonymous tip about an hour ago. Someone reported that there's a plan to plant drugs on your property tonight or tomorrow night. The caller wouldn't give details, but they said it was substantial, enough to frame you for distribution." My blood ran cold. Frame me. Think about it. You're in the middle of pressing charges against Tucker and Brittany for fraud and attempted murder. If you suddenly get arrested for drug trafficking, your credibility is destroyed. The cases against them fall apart. It's desperate, but it's smart. Can you stop him? "We're gonna try." I could hear him moving, gathering things. "I'm organizing a stakeout tonight, me and 2 deputies. We'll be at your place by 10 p.m., set up in positions around the property. If Tucker shows up or sends someone, we'll catch them in the act." What do I do? Act normal. Leave the lights on like you're home. We'll park our vehicles out of sight and monitor the cameras from inside your house. If they come, we'll be ready. At 10 p.m., Hendricks arrived with 2 deputies, a younger man named Torres and a woman named Parker. They moved quietly, efficiently, parking their patrol cars behind the barn, where they couldn't be seen from the road. Parker set up in the living room with a laptop connected to my security system. Torres positioned himself upstairs with a view of the driveway. Hendricks stayed with me in the kitchen. "How long do we wait?" I asked. As long as it takes. He checked his watch. The tip said tonight or tomorrow. Could be hours. Could be nothing. But something in his expression told me he didn't believe it would be nothing. We sat in the dark kitchen, the only light coming from the camera monitors on the table. The house was silent except for the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the occasional crackle of the deputies' radios. Outside, the November wind rustled through the bare trees, making shadows dance across the screens. 11 p.m. passed, then midnight. My coffee grew cold in the cup. At 12:40 a.m. Parker's voice came through the radio, quiet but sharp. Movement. South fence line. Hendricks stood immediately, hand on his weapon. How many? 2 figures, coming through the fence near the back pasture. I looked at the screen. There they were, 2 dark shapes moving across my property, one carrying what looked like a bag. That's them, Hendricks said. Everyone hold position. Let them get closer. We need them on the property with the drugs before we move. My heart hammered in my chest as we watched those figures approach. One was tall, moving confidently. The other, smaller, nervous. Is that Tucker? I whispered. Hendricks leaned closer to the screen. Can't tell yet, but we're about to find out. The 2 figures stopped near the barn. The taller one set down the bag and began pulling something out. Torres Parker on my signal, Hendricks said into his radio. Then he turned to me. Stay here, Mr. Sullivan. No matter what happens, you stay in this house. And then he was moving silent as a ghost out the back door. I watched the screens, my hands gripping the edge of the table. This was it. After weeks of betrayal, poisoning, and fear, it was finally coming to an end. Or so I thought. Imagine you're standing where I am right now, knowing what I know, seeing what I've just seen. What would your next move be? Tell me in the comments before we go any further. And a quick note before we continue, the next part includes dramatized elements that may not reflect real events in full. If this isn't for you, feel free to stop here. I respect that choice. Thursday night. The temperature had dropped near freezing frost coating the fields. I sat in my darkened kitchen eyes, fixed on the newly installed security monitors. Sheriff Hendricks sat beside me with 2 deputies. We had been waiting for 3 hours. Then at 11:47 p.m., headlights appeared on County Road 47. Vehicle approaching, Parker whispered from the living room. On the screen, a silver Audi rolled slowly down my driveway, headlights off, gliding through the darkness like a predator. It wasn't Tucker's usual black sedan. He'd borrowed this one smart enough to know his own car would be recognized. The Audi stopped near the barn. A tall figure stepped out dressed in black, a baseball cap, pulled low gloves covering his hands. Even through the grainy footage, I recognized the posture. The walk. Ah, that's my son, I whispered, my chest tightening. Tucker opened the trunk and pulled out a shovel and a heavy duffel bag. He moved with purpose, heading straight for the back garden, the same area where the midnight appraisers had trespassed weeks earlier. This wasn't improvisation. This was rehearsed. He set the bag down and began digging. About 3 feet deep, just as Hendricks had predicted. Deep enough to hide something, but not deep enough to escape a real search. Hendricks spoke quietly into his radio. All units hold position. Let him finish. We need him with the product. Copy, Torres replied. On the monitor, Tucker reached the depth he wanted. He wiped sweat from his face despite the cold and unzipped the duffel bag. One by one, he removed 5 thick plastic packages filled with white crystalline powder, methamphetamine. 5 kilograms, enough to ruin lives and send someone to prison for decades. He placed the packages carefully into the hole, arranging them with precision. Then he shoveled dirt back over them, packing it down, smoothing the ground until it looked untouched. When he finished, he nodded to himself and picked up the shovel. Now, Hendricks said. The barn floodlights burst on, flooding the yard with blinding light. Tucker froze. Torres and Parker rushed in, weapons drawn. Freeze police, hands in the air. The shovel fell from Tucker's hands. For a split second, I thought he might run. Then Hendricks stepped into view, and Tucker's shoulders collapsed. On the ground, face down. Tucker dropped to his knees, then flat onto the frost-covered dirt. Parker snapped the handcuffs onto his wrists while Torres kept his weapon trained. Hendricks walked to the disturbed soil and began digging with gloved hands. Within moments, he pulled out the first bag, then the second, third, fourth, fifth. He laid them in a neat row on the grass, the white powder glowing under the floodlights. Tucker Sullivan. Hendricks said, his voice calm and firm. You are under arrest for possession with intent to distribute a controlled substance, criminal trespassing, and conspiracy to commit fraud. You have the right to remain silent. Tucker said nothing. They hauled him to his feet. That's when he saw me standing at the kitchen window. Our eyes met across the yard. His face crumpled. Dad, he shouted, please help me. I didn't move. I couldn't speak. Hendricks guided Tucker to the patrol car. Before closing the door, he leaned in. You want to tell me where 5 kilos of meth came from? Tucker hesitated. Then, through the radio Hendricks had left on my kitchen table, I heard my son begin to talk. I got it from a guy named Brett Blackwood. Tucker said, his voice hollow. Kansas City. I met him through gambling. And the plan? Hendricks asked. Tucker let out a bitter laugh. Bury it here, then make an anonymous tip. You'd search the farm, find the drugs, arrest my dad. Why your father? Because if he's in prison, he can't fight the power of attorney I forged. Convicts can't manage their affairs. I'd become his legal guardian, sell the farm, and pay my debts. How much do you owe? $180,000, Tucker whispered. Poker, sports betting. I borrowed from people who don't forgive. They said if I didn't pay by Christmas, they'd kill me. Through the radio static, I listened as my son explained everything, how he bought the meth, how he researched the amount needed to guarantee federal charges, how framing me was the only way he saw to survive. Did Brittany know? Hendricks asked. Not about the drugs. That was my idea. She just handled the poison to speed things up. We thought if he died naturally, we could keep everything quiet. But when the fraud started unraveling, we needed something bigger. Something that would destroy his credibility completely. Hendricks closed the car door. The confession was over. I stood at the window long after the patrol cars drove away, their red and blue lights fading into the night. My son was gone, not just from my land, but from my life. I knew I'd done the right thing. That knowledge didn't stop my heart from breaking. The house felt unbearably quiet. Yet one question lingered. Hendricks had mentioned it days earlier, almost casually. We got an anonymous tip. Someone had known. Someone had warned the police before Tucker ever dug that hole. Who was it? That question would haunt me until the answer finally came, bringing with it a truth I never could have imagined. 1 month later, I sat in the Douglas County Courthouse, watching my son stand trial for crimes I never imagined he could commit. The room felt cold and sterile, stripped of warmth, nothing like the farmhouse where I had raised him. As the prosecutor laid out the evidence piece by piece, I realized how completely Tucker had destroyed his own life, and how close he had come to ending mine. I studied his face across the courtroom, searching for the boy I once knew, but all I saw was a stranger shaped by fear, desperation, and choices that could never be undone. December 15th, 2024 became a date etched into my memory with painful clarity. Judge Patricia Moreno presided from the bench, her steel gray hair pulled back, her sharp eyes missing nothing. Prosecutor Sarah Mitchell stood calm and composed her voice steady as she outlined the charges without drama or flourish. Forgery, fraud, possession with intent to distribute a controlled substance, criminal trespassing, elder abuse, conspiracy to commit murder. Each charge landed heavily, stacking one upon another until the weight of them felt almost unbearable. The evidence unfolded methodically. Mitchell displayed the forged power of attorney beside my real signature taken from my driver's license. Even from a distance, the differences were unmistakable. The crooked loop of the J, the uneven spacing, the careless dot that betrayed impatience rather than habit. Security footage followed, showing the Midwest Property Group SUV arriving at my farm at exactly 11:17 p.m. The timestamp glowed on the screen like an accusation. There was no arguing with images, no room for interpretation, only proof that something deliberate had been planned under cover of darkness. Medical testimony came next. Doctors explained how digoxin poisoning works, how the dosage introduced into my system was dangerous yet subtle, capable of imitating heart failure closely enough to delay suspicion. Charts, lab results, and expert explanations filled the courtroom. I listened without emotion, as though they were discussing someone else's body, someone else's life. Then the stakeout footage played. Under floodlights, Tucker appeared on screen, digging into my soil, burying 5 kilograms of methamphetamine on land I had worked for decades. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. I remained still, my hands folded, my eyes fixed forward. Phone records followed enlarged, so everyone could read them. Dozens of calls and messages between Tucker and Brett Blackwood stretched across 6 months. Short messages, direct language. Transactions reduced to code, got the product. 5 keys, like you said. He's weak now. Another week. Each line stripped away any remaining illusion. Financial records revealed gambling debts totaling $180,000, accumulated quietly over 2 years. Mitchell traced the progression with care, showing how desperation led Tucker from borrowed money to criminal alliances, and how those alliances eventually turned inward toward his own family. When Tucker took the stand, he looked smaller than I remembered. The orange jumpsuit hung loosely on his frame. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and he avoided looking at me entirely. His voice trembled, but his words came clearly enough. He described meeting Brett Blackwood at a casino in Kansas City. Poker games, loans, promises that hardened into threats. When he could no longer pay, Brett offered a solution for a price. Move drugs, hide them somewhere safe, buy time, survive. Tucker admitted he agreed because fear had replaced reason. Mitchell's questions were precise and unforgiving. Where did he hide the drugs? Tucker hesitated, then named my farm. County Road 47. He explained the plan plainly. Tip off the police, have me arrested. Sell the land using the forged power of attorney, and use the proceeds to pay his debts. The courtroom went silent. When asked about the forgery, he admitted practicing my signature for weeks. He said Brett knew someone who would notarize anything if paid enough. When the sale stalled, he moved to the next step. Poison, digoxin, quiet and subtle, something people would not question in an aging man with a heart condition. When asked what happened after I survived, Tucker admitted panic took over. He moved to the final plan, burying drugs on my property. Larger risk, larger consequences. He spoke of survival, not morality. When Mitchell asked if he loved his father, Tucker did not answer right away. His silence said more than words ever could. By the time he finished testifying, he was crying openly. I felt nothing. Not anger, not grief. Just a hollow absence where emotion once lived, as though something essential had already been taken from me. When it was my turn to testify, my legs felt heavy as stone. I answered each question slowly and carefully. Mitchell asked if I loved my son. I said I had, but I no longer recognized him. I explained that if Tucker had come to me honestly, if he had admitted fear or debt, I would have given him everything. The farm, the money, all of it. That is what fathers do. But he did not ask for help. He chose deception. He chose violence disguised as necessity. He chose a path that led only to loss. The defense attempted one final question, asking whether I had ever refused Tucker assistance before. I answered no. The truth hung in the room, uncomfortable and undeniable. After closing arguments, the jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous. Guilty on all counts. Judge Moreno sentenced Tucker to 15 years in federal prison. His wife received 8 years after cooperating with investigators. Brett Blackwood was sentenced to 12. The gavel struck wood. The sound echoed. There was no relief, only silence. I returned to a farm that felt too large, too quiet, and unbearably empty. The buildings remained. The land remained. Everything else felt altered. Nights stretched longer, sleep came unevenly, and yet one question refused to leave me alone. Victor Blackwood, the man who warned me. A stranger who appeared briefly spoke carefully, then vanished. He had warned me about Leaves land and danger, without explaining how he knew. I replayed his words endlessly, wondering what knowledge carried such urgency that it crossed bloodlines and loyalties. After the trial, I finally learned the truth. Victor Blackwood was Brett Blackwood's father. For years, he had watched his son sink deeper into crime and addiction, powerless to stop the descent. When Brett drunkenly mentioned my farm during a late-night call, Victor recognized the danger immediately. He faced an impossible choice: protect his own child, or warn a stranger whose life was about to be destroyed. He chose to warn me. He called the sheriff anonymously. His actions saved my life and ensured his own son's arrest. Victor never testified. He disappeared after the arrests. No forwarding address, no phone number, nothing left behind but the consequences of his decision. I do not know where he went or how he lives now. I only know he carries a weight few people could endure: the knowledge that saving one life required betraying his own blood. I cannot judge that choice. Betrayal sometimes wears the face of survival. Salvation sometimes comes from people burdened with guilt, heavier than any sentence a court could impose. Every morning I walk the fields alone. I follow fence lines, check gates, and listen to wind moving through dry stalks and bare branches. The land feels unchanged, yet nothing is the same. Silence has become a constant companion. Somewhere Victor Blackwood carries the aftermath of a decision that preserved my life while destroying what remained of his family. I carry my own burden: memories of trust misplaced and love weaponized. The farm stands, the seasons turn. Some consequences do not fade. They settle quietly and remain. I think often about how thin the line is between ordinary days and irreversible moments, how quickly routines collapse under secrets, how people justify actions once desperation takes hold. Tucker believed survival required sacrificing me. Victor believed salvation required betraying his son. Both choices reshaped lives forever. The courtroom resolved the legal questions, but it did nothing to heal the wreckage left behind. Justice does not restore what is lost. It only marks where damage occurred. Healing, if it comes at all, arrives slowly and without guarantees. Some nights I sit on the porch and watch darkness settle over the fields. I think about warnings that arrive quietly, disguised as coincidence or chance. I think about how close I came to becoming a name in a report, instead of a voice telling this story. I do not pretend to understand fate or design. I only know someone chose to act when silence would have been easier. That choice altered everything. I continue moving forward, carrying gratitude and grief together, uncertain which weighs more on any given day. What remains is not resolution, but clarity. I know now how fragile trust can be, how easily love can be twisted by fear, how danger sometimes announces itself in whispers rather than noise. The farm endures, I endure. Somewhere beyond these fields, an old man bears the cost of doing what he believed was necessary. His warning arrived in time. Its consequences will last forever. Some stories do not end cleanly. They simply become part of who we are, etched into memory, carried forward without explanation. 3 weeks after the trial, as winter loosened its grip and early spring crept across the Kansas farmland, I finally gathered the courage to do what I had avoided for too long. The weight of unanswered questions had grown heavier with each passing day, pressing down on my chest, until I could no longer ignore it. I needed to find Victor Blackwood. I needed to look him in the eyes and thank him properly for saving my life. But more than that, I needed to understand something that had haunted me through sleepless nights and long, solitary mornings on the farm. How had he known about my son's plan before Tucker had even fully committed to it? How had a stranger appeared at exactly the right moment, with exactly the right warning to save everything I had? The questions circled endlessly in my mind as I drove toward Lawrence on a quiet Thursday morning, the same route I'd traveled countless times over the decades. The landscape was familiar bare fields, waiting for spring, planting fence posts marching along the roadside, the occasional farmhouse sitting back from the road like a sentinel. But everything felt different now, colored by betrayal and loss and the strange miracle of survival. The sky was overcast, threatening rain that wouldn't quite fall, and the temperature hovered in that uncertain territory between winter's end and spring's beginning. I parked in front of Baxter's Pharmacy, the same place where this nightmare had first begun all those months ago. The building looked exactly as it always had: brick facade, green awning, the hand-painted sign that Old Man Baxter had commissioned back in the 70s. But walking through that door felt like stepping back into a memory I wasn't sure I wanted to revisit. The bell above the door chimed with its familiar bright sound announcing my arrival. Emma stood behind the counter, her red hair pulled back in the familiar practical ponytail she always wore. When she looked up and saw me, her expression immediately softened into something between sympathy and sadness. The trial had been covered extensively in the Lawrence Journal World, and everyone in Douglas County knew what had happened by now. Privacy was one of the casualties of living in a small community where everyone knew everyone else's business. "Mr. Sullivan," she said softly, her voice carrying genuine compassion. "I heard about the trial. I'm so sorry for everything you've been through. I can't imagine how difficult this must have been for you." "Thank you, Emma," I replied, appreciating her kindness even as it made my throat tighten with emotion I wasn't ready to show. "I'm looking for someone who came in here last October. Victor Blackwood, an elderly gentleman probably in his mid-70s. White hair, thin build, wore a faded jacket. He was here when I picked up my heart medication." Recognition flickered across her face immediately. "Yes, Mr. Blackwood. I remember him. He came in a few times after that day for his diabetes medication, but I haven't seen him lately." She hesitated, concern creeping into her expression. "Is everything all right? Is he okay?" "I hope so," I said honestly. "I just need to speak with him. It's important. Do you have an address on file for him?" She turned to her computer and typed for a moment, her fingers moving quickly across the keyboard. Then she frowned, shaking her head with obvious frustration. "I'm sorry, Mr. Sullivan. All we have is Route 12. No house number, no apartment designation. He usually paid cash for his prescriptions, so we don't have credit card information or much detail in our system. Just the route number and his phone number, but..." She clicked a few more times. "The phone number shows as disconnected now." My heart sank. Route 12 stretched for miles with dozens of properties scattered along its length. Finding Victor without a specific address would be like searching for a needle in a haystack. I was about to thank her and leave when an older woman emerged from the back room, moving with the careful deliberation of someone who'd spent decades on their feet. She wore a white pharmacist's coat, and her name tag identified her as Gloria Richards. Her gray hair was cut short and practical, and her eyes held the kind of wisdom that comes from witnessing decades of human suffering and triumph. "You're asking about Victor Blackwood." She asked, her voice gentle but weathered like wood that had been smoothed by years of wind and rain. "Yes, ma'am," I replied, turning to face her fully. She studied me for a long moment, her gaze moving across my face as if reading a story written there. Then she nodded slowly, recognition settling over her features. "Whitaker Sullivan. I recognized you from the trial coverage in the Lawrence Journal. They ran your photo several times during the proceedings." She paused, her expression growing heavier. "Victor's been through more pain than most people should have to bear in one lifetime, more than any parent should ever have to endure." "What do you mean?" I asked, though something in my chest already knew the answer would be difficult to hear. She sighed deeply, the sound carrying decades of witnessing tragedy and grief. "He lost his son to drugs, Brett Blackwood. Victor tried everything to save that boy, everything a father could possibly do. He poured his heart, his soul, and every dollar he had into trying to pull his son back from the edge." The name hit me like a physical blow, stealing the breath from my lungs. Brett Blackwood, the dealer who had supplied Tucker with the methamphetamine. The man behind the drugs that were supposed to be buried on my land to frame me. The criminal who had enabled my son's desperate final plan. Victor Blackwood was Brett's father. The realization crashed over me like a wave, and suddenly everything made terrible, beautiful sense. He tried everything. Gloria continued, her voice heavy with the weight of watching a man suffer. Rehab programs, counseling, tough love, gentle love, distance closeness. He mortgaged his house to pay for treatment centers. He drove Brett to meetings, sat with him through withdrawals, held him when he cried. Nothing made a difference. Brett still ended up dealing to support his habit, and eventually he cut Victor out of his life completely. Victor used to come in here to pick up his diabetes medication, and sometimes he'd just stand at the counter and cry. He'd say he felt like he'd failed as a father, that he should have done something different, been someone different. I stood there in the pharmacy, surrounded by shelves of medications meant to heal, and understood the full weight of what Victor had done. When Brett was arrested after my son's plot was exposed, Victor must have been devastated. But Gloria was right. There would have been relief too, the terrible relief of knowing your child was alive, even if they were behind bars. "Do you know where he lives?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Gloria nodded. "Maple Grove Trailer Park, Route 12 about 6 miles west of here, Unit 47. Yellow trailer with blue trim around the windows. You can't miss it. There are 2 plastic chairs on the little wooden porch out front." I thanked both women and walked back to my truck, my mind reeling with this new understanding. Victor had saved me by betraying his own child. He had chosen to warn a stranger rather than protect his son, knowing full well what that choice would cost him. What kind of strength did that take? What kind of pain came with that decision? 20 minutes later, I pulled into Maple Grove Trailer Park. The development was modest, but well maintained, with neat rows of mobile homes set back from gravel driveways. Trees that had been planted decades ago provided shade and small gardens, marked where residents had tried to make these temporary structures feel like permanent homes. Victor's trailer sat near the back of the park, exactly as Gloria had described. The yellow paint was faded but clean, and blue trim outlined the windows like careful brush strokes. 2 plastic chairs rested on a small wooden porch that looked handmade, probably built by Victor himself. I sat in my truck for a moment, gathering courage. Then I climbed out and walked to his door. My hand hesitated before knocking, but I forced myself to complete the gesture. 3 solid knocks that echoed in the quiet afternoon. The door opened almost immediately, as if he'd been standing just on the other side, waiting. Victor Blackwood stood there in worn jeans and a flannel shirt, looking older than I remembered, but with those same pale, piercing eyes that had held such urgency in the pharmacy months ago. "Whitaker Sullivan," he said quietly, his voice carrying no surprise. "I've been expecting you." He stepped aside, gesturing for me to enter. Inside his home was small but remarkably neat. A kitchenette occupied one corner with dishes stacked carefully in a drainer. A worn sofa sat against one wall, its fabric faded but clean. A small card table with 2 chairs created a dining area near the window. But what caught my attention immediately was one wall covered in photographs, a timeline of a life told in images. A smiling boy on a bicycle, gap-toothed and full of joy. The same boy slightly older holding a baseball glove. A teenager in a cap and gown at graduation, hope shining in his eyes. And then nothing. The timeline simply stopped, as if time itself had ended, or the photographer had given up documenting a story that had turned too dark to capture. "Coffee?" Victor asked, moving toward the kitchenette. "Yes, please," I replied, my voice rough with emotion. He poured 2 cups from a pot that smelled fresh and strong, and we sat across from each other at the small card table. 2 old men who had been connected by tragedy and choice, carrying truths neither of us had asked for, but both of us had to bear. "You saved my life," I said, finally breaking the silence that had stretched between us. Twice, actually. First with the warning about the leaves, then with the tip to Sheriff Hendricks. "How did you know? How could you possibly have known what my son was planning?" Victor stared into his coffee cup for a long moment, and I watched emotions play across his weathered face. Grief, regret, resignation, and something that might have been peace. Victor poured more coffee into both our cups, his hands steady, despite the weight of what he was about to reveal. The steam rose between us, like ghosts of the past waiting to be acknowledged. He set the pot down carefully, then settled back into his chair with the deliberate movement of a man preparing to unburden himself of a story he'd carried alone for far too long. "What I'm about to tell you," he began, his voice low and measured, "is a story 50 years in the making. A story about 2 brothers, a war that changed everything, and a debt that can never be fully repaid no matter how many years pass or how many sacrifices are made." He reached into a drawer beside the table and pulled out a worn leather wallet. From it, he extracted a photograph so old the edges had begun to curl and the colors had faded to sepia tones. He laid it on the table between us with the reverence of someone handling a sacred relic. I had a brother, Victor said, his finger tracing the edge of the photograph. Patrick Blackwood, 3 years older than me and everything I wanted to be when I was growing up. Strong, confident, brave. The kind of man who walked into a room and everyone noticed. He enlisted in the Army in 1968, right after graduating high school. Said it was his duty to serve his country. Our mother cried for a week, but Patrick was determined. He deployed to Vietnam in early 1970. I picked up the photograph, carefully studying the young man captured there. He stood in Army fatigues in front of a helicopter, his face lean and serious beneath his helmet. The resemblance to Victor was unmistakable, the same sharp cheekbones, the same intense eyes, though Patrick's held a determination that bordered on fierce. On May 14, 1970. Victor continued, his voice growing heavier with each word. Patrick's platoon was on a routine patrol near the Cambodian border when they walked straight into an ambush. Viet Cong had been waiting in the tree line. 5 men from his squad got cut off from the main group when the shooting started. The platoon leader ordered a tactical retreat standard procedure. When you're outgunned and outmaneuvered, everyone fell back except Patrick. Victor's hands wrapped around his coffee cup, holding it like it might anchor him to the present as he relived the past. He went back for them. One by one, under heavy machine gun fire, he pulled those men out, dragged them through the mud and chaos through hell itself. The first man had been shot in the leg. The second had shrapnel in his chest. The third was so disoriented from a concussion he couldn't walk straight. The fourth had a sucking chest wound that should have killed him right there. I found myself leaning forward, drawn into the story, despite knowing it would lead somewhere painful. Victor's eyes were distant now, seeing things I couldn't see, replaying scenes that had been described to him in letters and official reports and the nightmares that probably still haunted him. 4 men saved, Victor said. 4 lives pulled from certain death. But there was one more. A 19-year-old private from Kansas who had only been in country for 3 weeks. Just a kid, really. Drafted straight out of high school. Patrick went back for him, even though his commanding officer was screaming at him over the radio to abort. Even though the enemy fire was getting heavier by the second. Even though everyone watching thought he was signing his own death warrant. Victor's voice cracked slightly and he paused to collect himself. When he continued, each word seemed to cost him something. He reached that last man, grabbed him by his vest, and started dragging him toward the rally point. They were maybe 30 yards from safety when a grenade landed right between them. Patrick saw it fall, had maybe 2 seconds to react. He could have jumped away, saved himself, left the kid to die. Instead, he threw himself on top of it. The silence in the small trailer was absolute. I sat frozen, the coffee cup halfway to my lips, understanding beginning to dawn like a terrible sunrise. The explosion killed Patrick instantly. Victor said, his eyes glistening with tears that hadn't fallen in the decades but were always there just beneath the surface. But it saved the private underneath him, saved him from the blast, from the shrapnel, from everything. That 19-year-old kid took some fragments to the head and spent months in military hospitals recovering from his physical wounds, and even longer recovering from what we now call PTSD. But he lived. He came home. He built a life. Because my brother gave his own life to protect someone he'd never met before that day. Victor slid another document across the table, an official military report yellowed with age, the typing faded, but still legible. It was Patrick Blackwood's Silver Star citation, detailing his heroism. At the bottom was a list of the 5 men he'd saved. "Look at name number 5, Victor said quietly. My eyes scanned down the list until they reached the bottom entry. Private J. R. Hartman Whitaker, Robert Hartman, age 19, Kansas. The room tilted. My hands began to shake so badly I had to set down my coffee cup before I dropped it. Memory fragments I'd buried so deep, I'd almost convinced myself they weren't real, began surfacing like debris from a shipwreck. Jungle heat so thick you could barely breathe. The deafening sound of automatic weapons fire, someone shouting, "Stay down, kid!" in a voice hoarse with fear and determination. Strong hands grabbing my vest, dragging me across ground that was equal parts mud and blood. An explosion that felt like the world ending. "My God," I whispered, my voice barely functional. "That was your brother. Patrick saved me." Victor nodded slowly, tears now running freely down his weathered cheeks. "When I saw your name at Baxter's Pharmacy that day, Whitaker Sullivan from County Road, 47-something, clicked in my memory. I went home and pulled out Patrick's file, the one the Army sent me after he died. I'd memorized every name on that list years ago, studied them until I could recite them in my sleep. Whitaker Robert Hartman. There you were 50 years later, still alive and living just a few miles from me. Still walking this earth because my brother chose to die so you could live." The weight of it crashed over me like a physical force. I'd taken shrapnel to the head, and that explosion spent 8 months in various military hospitals. The doctors said I had severe PTSD, that the trauma had fragmented my memory, that parts of that day might never come back fully. My family, trying to help me start fresh, trying to distance me from the horror, had started calling me Whitaker instead of Robert. They'd helped me build a new identity. A new life encouraged me to bury Vietnam so deep I could almost forget it had happened. And I had. I'd buried it so successfully that I'd forgotten the man who saved me, forgotten his sacrifice, forgotten that I owed my entire life to someone I'd never properly thanked. "I didn't know," I said, my voice breaking. "All these years, I never knew who saved me that day. The memories were too fragmented. I couldn't remember faces or names, just impressions. Fear and chaos and someone pulling me to safety. I didn't know it was Patrick. I didn't know I owed him everything." Victor reached across the table and gripped my hand with surprising strength. "When Brett called me that night in October, drunk and bragging about his scheme with your son, I knew I couldn't let it happen. I couldn't let Patrick's sacrifice be for nothing. He died so you could live Whitaker, so you could come home, raise a family, build a life on that farm. I had to protect that. I had to protect what he gave his life to save, even if it meant betraying my own son." We sat there together, 2 old men weeping openly for brothers we'd lost, for sons who'd failed us for 50 years, of pain and guilt and survival. Victor had saved me twice, once through his brother's sacrifice and once through his own impossible choice. And I understood now why he'd done it, why he'd been willing to turn in his own child to protect a stranger. Because I wasn't really a stranger. I was living proof that Patrick's death had meant something, that his sacrifice hadn't been in vain. "Your brother gave me everything," I said through my tears. "My life, my farm, my years with Mary, watching Tucker grow up, all of it only exists because Patrick chose to save me. And you," my voice failed me completely, "you honored that sacrifice by saving me again, even when it cost you everything." Victor nodded, releasing my hand and wiping his eyes with the back of his sleeve. "Patrick always said that every life is worth saving, that we're all connected in ways we don't understand until it's too late. I tried to teach Brett that same lesson, but I failed. Maybe if his mother had lived, things would have been different. Maybe I made mistakes I can't even see. But in the end, I had to choose protect my son, who'd already chosen his path, or honor my brother by protecting the life he died to save. The weight of revelation of connection of 50 years of invisible threads linking our lives together settled over us like a benediction. We sat in that small trailer as afternoon light filtered through the windows, 2 men bound by sacrifice and saved by impossible choices, finally understanding the full story that had brought us to this moment. If you're listening to this family story tonight, I want you to hear me clearly. Don't be like me. Don't let pride become the prison that keeps you from reaching out when your children are drowning. Don't let silence build walls so high that desperation becomes their only language. I'm an old man now, standing on the other side of a family betrayal so deep it nearly destroyed everything. And I'm telling you, the greatest tragedy isn't what our children do to us, but what we fail to do before they reach that point of no return. God gave me warning signs I chose to ignore. Tucker's increased visits weren't about reconnection. They were reconnaissance missions. His questions about property values weren't innocent curiosity, they were calculations. His sudden need for money wasn't a temporary setback. It was a cry for help, wrapped in a lie. But I was too proud to ask the hard questions too, trusting to dig beneath the surface, too comfortable in my assumptions to see the truth staring me in the face. God was speaking, but I wasn't listening. Then God placed Victor Blackwood in my path, like an angel when I needed him, most a stranger in a pharmacy who carried secrets that would save my life. He orchestrated Virginia Turner's security camera, capturing evidence at the exact moment it mattered. He surrounded me with the Robinson Sheriff Hendricks and Emma at the pharmacy people, who cared enough to notice when something was wrong. When I thought I was completely alone facing family betrayal from the one person I trusted most, God was building a safety net I couldn't see. And when everything fell apart, when my son stood in handcuffs and my heart shattered into pieces I thought could never be repaired, God still gave me a second chance to rebuild, to forgive, and to find peace in the ruins. I learned 3 truths the hard way, truths I'm sharing now, so you don't have to learn them through the same pain that nearly killed me. First, talk to your family before desperation makes them choose crime. Tucker owed $180,000 to people who don't forgive debts, but he never asked me for a single dollar of help, not one. If he had walked through my door and said, "Dad, I'm in terrible trouble. I've made mistakes and I need help," I would have given him everything. The farm, the money, my last breath, all of it. Because that's what fathers do for their sons. But pride destroyed him. His pride wouldn't let him admit failure, and my pride wouldn't let me see past the facade he presented. We were both too proud to have the honest conversation that could have saved us both. Don't let pride steal your chance to help the people you love. Ask the uncomfortable questions. Create space for truth, even when it's ugly. Family betrayal often begins where honest communication ends. Second, forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, but it means releasing the hate that poisons your own heart. I visited Tucker once in Leavenworth Federal Prison. He cried, apologized, desperately begged for understanding. I looked at my son through bulletproof glass and said, "I forgive you." And I meant it. Not because what he did was acceptable, it never will be. Not because the pain disappeared, it hasn't. But because carrying hatred was killing me, just as surely as the Digox and Brittany mixed into my medication. Forgiveness is not about the person who hurt you. It's about refusing to let their actions continue destroying you long after the crime is committed. I forgave Tucker, but I also left the door to my life open just a crack. The rest is up to him. I can't save him from the consequences of his choices, but I can save myself from becoming bitter and broken. Third legacy isn't land or money. It's the lives you touch and the lessons you leave behind. I spent 40 years building that farm, convinced it would be my lasting contribution to the world. But the farm is just dirt and wood and fence posts. My real legacy is what I teach others through this painful family story. It's the scholarship fund I established in Patrick Blackwood's name, helping children of veterans get the education that might save them from the desperation that destroyed my son. It's Victor Blackwood now living in the guest house on my property, 2 old men connected by sacrifice and survival, showing our community that family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's the people who show up when blood fails you. It's sharing this story so that maybe somewhere someone hears it and makes a different choice than Tucker did, or I did. As I stand here today looking back on everything that happened, I realize that family betrayal cuts deeper than any other wound, because it comes from the place where we're supposed to be safest. But I also realize that redemption is always possible when we're willing to face the truth, do the hard work, and accept help from unexpected sources. Victor and I sit on my porch most evenings now, watching the sun set over the fields, 2 survivors of different wars, learning that it's never too late to find connection, purpose, and peace. If this family story moved you in any way, I'd be grateful if you'd take a moment to leave a comment below. Share your thoughts, your own experiences, or even just a word of encouragement. It helps me know these painful lessons are reaching people who need them. Please hit the like button if this resonated with you, and subscribe to the channel so we can continue bringing you meaningful stories that tackle the real difficult issues families face. Your support doesn't just help the channel grow. It helps us reach more people who might be standing where I once stood, unaware of the betrayal forming in the shadows, or where Tucker stood, Too proud to ask for help before it was too late. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. Thank you for listening to an old man's painful journey without judgment. It takes courage to hear difficult truths, and you gave me that gift today. One final note before we part ways. This story contains fictional elements woven with real-life lessons crafted specifically for educational and reflective purposes. If you found this style of storytelling isn't for you, I completely respect that choice. Please feel free to explore other content that better suits your preferences. There's no judgment here, only appreciation for the time you've already given. May God bless you and your families. May He give you the wisdom to see warning signs, the courage to have hard conversations, and the grace to forgive when forgiveness seems impossible. And may you never have to learn these lessons the way I did through lost betrayal and the long, difficult road back to peace.